The story is kind of long. For a little bit of background information for the following events, the story dates back to when I was just a young child, to now as a 19-year-old almost adult, to before I was even born. I didn't live in the worst or best neighborhood. It was a neighborhood where if you left your bike out, it was almost guaranteed to get stolen within just a day. It's not like there was a murder reported every other day, just a neighborhood where people like to steal bikes and maybe rob a lawnmower out of your shed. Anyways, me and my family have been victims of these things multiple times. It started off when my dad's truck got robbed before I was even born, and he had some tools in his work bag stolen. We had no idea at the time that the same person would be targeting us for years. One day, my mom was active and doing things in the house when I and my dad were sleeping. My mother told me this story, by the way. She was doing some cleaning until she had heard a commotion in the bathroom. She went in and then saw a teenager or a young adult climbing through the window. She described him as youngish, blonde, and he wasn't even wearing a ski mask or anything, just a black hoodie. She said that he stared at her for a moment and then slowly climbed out of the window and then left. My mom said she wasn't scared of him and didn't wake up my dad because she was scared he would have chased the kid down and kicked his ass. My dad was an intimidating guy, well over 6 foot, closer to 6'6" or so. Broad shoulder frame built like a truck and super protective of his family. The point is, he would have torn the dude apart if my mom had woken him up. Anyways, my mom ended up telling my dad, and he was pissed. Both my mom and dad say the guy would walk up and down the streets trying car door handles, looking in car windows, and sometimes even going up to houses and trying the handle on those. My dad would even sit there and look out the window just waiting for him to try a handle. Yeah, my dad really wanted to mess that guy up. Fast forward a couple of years, I was probably 6 years old, and my mother and my father and I were in the living room. We were hanging out on the couches and whatever, when the handle of our door started to jiggle. My dad jumped up and swung the door open just to see the same dumbass kid running down the block. For years, this jackass had been at the same dumb home break-in robber act. Fast forward again to age 12. I was sleeping in the living room on the couch for whatever reason that night. I woke up at like 3 a.m., so there was some kind of noise. I remember looking around the room and then just taking a sip of whatever I was drinking. Then out of nowhere, I heard the door handle jiggle and actual banging on the door. I got up, ran into my grandpa's room and woke him up. I told him someone had been trying to break into the house. Then he sprang up and ran to the front door. He forcefully swung open the door and then ran out onto the front porch. Nobody was there. It could have been completely unrelated to the stranger guy, but what are the odds of that? Fast forward to present day. Today we woke up and one of our cars was stolen. We filed a police report, and then my grandpa had a smart idea. My grandpa is good friends with all of our neighbors, but especially with our neighbor across the street from us. He went over, explained the situation to him, and asked if he could pull up his camera footage. He did. And around 3:40 earlier this morning, there was a sketchy, tall, lanky guy looking into his car windows and tried the handle in one of them. We knew then exactly who it was. We couldn't see his face on the camera, but just by the build of the guy, we knew it was him. His cameras only picked up his yard, but after the guy left, I'm guessing he went straight across the street to our car. We very stupidly left the keys in it, and the doors unlocked. I guess it is partly our fault, but I'll be sure to update you guys if anything else happens. Thanks for listening, and hopefully you'll have a better day than I did. This happened in the late summer of 2014, but I remember it clearly even 10 years later. In the fall of the previous year, I moved into an apartment with my boyfriend at the time. I was freshly 18 and he was 22. He was a socially inept groomer. Let's call him Mike. Mike was always emotionally distant and strange. We had many shared interests, but he refused to let me have friends, make new friends, or just go out and enjoy life in the city. I'd invite him to concerts for bands he liked, and he'd always decline. I'd offer to introduce him to my friends, but he'd decline. I'd go out to a show with my friends or go hang out with my friends, and he'd send me a Word document, a deranged poetic slide describing every single fault of mine he could discern. One time I smoked pot and he compared me to Medea killing her children. When I say poetic, I mean poetic, and when I say deranged, I mean deranged. Naturally, we broke up. A friend of mine found him on a dating website, and that was it. My parents helped me lug his stuff into a truck and took him and all of his crap to his parents' house. It was a done deal. I kept the apartment and tried to settle back in. It was fine. I enjoyed my alone time and I was now free to have friends visit. It seemed ideal. Upon falling asleep on my second night alone, I was quickly woken up by a knock on my door. I checked the time. It was maybe 3 to 4 a.m. I think. Yeah, screw that. No thanks. I tried to drift off again, but the knocking happened again, more rapidly and more aggressively this time. I kept ignoring it. I didn't have that many friends, and the friends I did have wouldn't be banging on my door at 3 a.m. Eventually, the banging stopped. I enjoyed my next 3 days. I went out with my friends, had some drinks, then came home alone and went to sleep. I was then awoken again by 3 loud bangs, and again at 4 a.m. What the hell? I then hear more bangs, and now the doorknob is rattling. This time whoever it was trying to open the door. Luckily this building was old and disgusting. The landlord, the paint jobs, roaches, and no AC. But what it did have was 2 deadbolts and a door chain, so I felt more curious than scared. I took a look through the peephole and saw a blonde man. He didn't look like a junkie or a weirdo, but I also didn't recognize him, and no, it wasn't Mike. He was dark-haired and he would have written a poem before he tried to break down a door. So, feeling young, stupid, and for whatever reason safe enough to sleep, I go the hell back to sleep. But it keeps happening. Every night I go to sleep, and every single night he knocks. He bangs and slams the door. He jiggles the doorknob left and right. He yanks on the doorknob. He flies into the door with the weight of his entire body, and he never talks. He'd really suck as a SWAT officer, and for some reason I never called the cops. I think I was in my ACAB era. I don't know. It went on for about a week, but I do eventually call my friend Pete. Pete and I hung out for the day. Maybe for a bit of context, Pete looked like the sniper in Saving Private Ryan. Skinny, bony, and oddly serious. Pete couldn't hurt a fly, but he had a weird ghoulish face that made it seem as though he could. So we waited and waited. We plotted, and we constructed a plan. Speaking in whispers, we waited into the night. 1, 2, 3. And then again, there's knocks at the door. Go time. Out of the peephole, we see the blonde man. What a surprise. He continues to knock, smash, and bang. With the chain lock on, we undid the 2 deadbolts. The knocking paused. We flick open the doorknob, and with a knife in each of our hands, we start screaming. We stab IKEA kitchen knives through the gap. We switch the blades around like pirates who are only allowed to carry butter knives. Screw off already! The blonde man stumbles back and then jogs down the hall. Pete and I just laugh our asses off at this. And to my surprise, the weird blonde man never returned. All it took was matching his craziness. I will never know why he targeted me or why he was so freaking insistent in getting into my apartment. This took place in June of 2015. I was a 25-year-old female who had just finished college and who took to the road to explore the western provinces of Canada. At this time, I found myself working odd jobs for cash in the province of British Columbia. If you're not aware, the Okanagan region of BC is a gorgeous place that has a perfect climate for growing fruit, especially cherries, apples, and wine grapes. In the spring, summer, and fall, tons of jobs open up for people to come pick fruit by hand, often living in camps in tent cities. I had just finished working on a farm in that region for May and June and got a ride to Vancouver to catch a Greyhound bus east into Alberta to do some more exploring. I was traveling pretty roughly and unsafely. My cell phone had no service because I hadn't paid my bill in 6 months, so I was dependent on Wi-Fi to stay in touch with loved ones, and I had no credit card. I was dependent on working short burst cash jobs to get by and carried a tent, so I always had somewhere to sleep. My main means of travel were hitchhiking, rideshares posted on Facebook groups, and Greyhound. I was trusting and somewhat naive, and to this day, I believe some angelic force or spiritual guide must have kept me from getting murdered because I took many stupid risks. And here unfolds one of my riskier decisions. The Greyhound ticket I'd booked departed at 7 in the morning the day after I got dropped off in Vancouver. I was getting dropped off around 5 p.m. and I was unable to find a place to stay because again, I didn't have a credit card. My plan was to hang around 24-hour fast food restaurants or coffee shops near the Greyhound station in downtown Vancouver all night, charging my phone and chilling with my belongings into the wee hours of the morning when I'd walk to the Greyhound station. At this time, I was carrying a large backpacker's pack with a tent and a sleeping bag on my back, as well as a small backpack in front for small personal belongings, and I really didn't want to get robbed. I used my phone with coffee shop Wi-Fi to Google 24-hour businesses downtown, and it narrowed down a few. There were not too many, but I had at least one Tim Hortons and one Starbucks. The sun was beginning to set, and I remember I took a walk down to the ocean to watch the pink sky sink down behind the barges and boats in the bay. I was carrying all of my stuff, and it was quite heavy, so I took my bags off and rested on a bench. I remember feeling satisfied and peaceful. It started to get late, and I decided to walk to the 24-hour Starbucks that I'd found on Google to set up shop for the night. I wandered a bit and located the store. I ordered my favorite coffee at the time and got cozy on a bench at the window. It was now close to 10:30 p.m. I had plugged all my devices in and was looking down at my phone, when in my peripheral vision I saw a man enter the Starbucks. He orders a drink, and then I can see him again in my peripheral vision, kind of curiously investigating me and my chaotic scene of bags and charging cables. He then sits on the bench next to me and starts up a conversation. He's probably about 5'10" built, short blonde hair, and attractive. I'm open, friendly, and trusting. We chat about what both of us are doing there at such a late hour. He told me he's a U.S. Coast Guard passing through Vancouver because he was relocating from Alaska to California. He then told me that he noticed me sitting on a bench on the beach hours before, which was at least a 30-minute walk from where we were. Suddenly, the Starbucks staff told us they were closing. It turns out they were no longer operating for 24 hours. It was almost midnight, and I realized I had to find another place to stay in downtown Vancouver. He asked me where I was going next, and I said I was going to look for another place to sit all night. He very kindly and generously offered to let me stay on the couch in his hotel suite until I had to get up at 4:30 a.m. to catch my bus. I felt I had no choice. I trusted him and I went with him. It was a 5 to 10 minute walk from the Starbucks. He was staying in a small Chinese hotel with small dragon statues out in the front. He took me up to a suite on the second floor, and I dropped my bags in the living room next to the couch. We shared a few words, and he told me not to drink any of the water or soda in the mini fridge or he'd get charged for it. I then curled up on the very small couch, and he went into his room. I didn't sleep well because I had to get up in a few hours at this point, and I was anxious about sleeping through my alarm. My alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. and I started gathering my belongings. I then went to the bathroom to brush my teeth and use the toilet. When I opened the door, he was out of the room. His attitude had completely changed from the night before. I don't know if he anxiously tossed and turned all night, regretting his decision to bring a strange girl into his hotel room, but he looked ready for a fight. His fists were clenched as he followed me around closely, and he kept saying, "Don't steal anything. Don't take anything that's not yours." I quickly gathered my belongings and left, waving and saying thank you as I went out the door. I walked to the Greyhound station, hopped on my bus, and headed farther east. To this day, I think about this tale often. I wonder if he followed me from the beach or if it was truly a coincidence. I wonder what his intentions were. I wonder what made his attitude change. I wonder if he thinks about this too. And I wonder if I dodged a bullet, how wrong things could have gone. Either way, I've been longing to tell this story. Hopefully it entertains people. The story I'm about to write happened a few years ago. To describe the incident, I think I'll need to give some context first. I'm a 29-year-old male now. Back in high school, I had a crush on this pretty girl. Eventually, I asked her out and we became each other's best friends. The story revolves around her father. Ever since we were together, I quickly realized he didn't like me much. He used to give me blank stares whenever we had dinner over at her house, and though I tried my best, he would always try to pick at me over something, even to the point of me dropping a single drop of rice outside of the plate. She and her mom were very apologetic though, and I learned quickly that her father was in the military and apparently developed some kind of mental disorder from his tour in Afghanistan. And so he was always groggy like that with almost every single person he met. He once told his daughter that even with me present, that such an ugly guy like me doesn't deserve a pretty girl like her. So in a way, I respected him, and I'm not gonna lie, I always felt sorry for him. Hence, I try to be naive about the things he said to me and just ignore them. I thought he was just being overprotective of his daughter. And oh boy, was he protective, all right. Fast forward to university. By this time, even though we had a couple of fights, she and I were still best friends and loved each other like crazy. By this time, she and I were doing side jobs and making enough money to afford our own apartment together, besides all the costs, and we decided to move out from our parents and start living on our own. Although my family were very happy seeing me move on, her transition was not so easy. At first, her father straight up denied her from moving out. However, thanks to her mom, she was finally able to move in with me despite him being very angry with me and at her over the entire ordeal. The problems began almost immediately after moving out. At first, he called my family, and he told them that apparently I'm this secret Satanist cult leader, and that I've lured his daughter away from him, as well as some other crazy stories. My family, who already knew about his mental health condition, assured him that I wasn't going to harm his daughter by any means, and that I love her more than anything, and that I would never let anything bad happen to her. This isn't even enough though. He called our university's office one day screaming and demanding to know why she's not returning his calls, and that I've probably done something bad to her. This resulted in a very ugly scene of both of us being pulled from our classes to the uni office and having to explain her father's conditions. Mind you, the reason she wasn't picking up the calls was because she was in the middle of class. In the meantime, something odd started happening with me in the middle of the night. Every night around 1 to 2 a.m., I started getting calls from an unknown number, but when I picked it up, I just heard breathing, no words, so I started ignoring them. Fast forward about a month, and she and I were out pretty late with some friends and came home very late at around 2 a.m. When we were about to pull over into our house, we saw her father's car in the driveway. But as soon as she got out to see what's up, the car started to speed away. This left both of us completely in awe. She tried calling him, but instead her mom picked up. But she told us that she had just woken up and didn't see her father anywhere. She was also shocked to learn what we've just seen. Even though he denied it at first, it turned out every night after her mom fell asleep, he sneaked out and drove all the way to ours, apparently to protect his daughter from my evil deeds. Her mom also found out that he used a burner phone every night to call to my number as well, just to spook me out or something. Even though you might think this is the worst incident, unfortunately, no, it's nowhere near it. After this happened, we didn't see or hear from him much, as her mom started staying up late and ensured us that he couldn't go out to us again. Fast forward a few nights without any phone calls or really anything from him. Well, one night we were sleeping on the bed, and then I woke up to something. At first, I didn't realize what it was amidst the darkness. So when I went to get up from the bed, my entire body shook with fear and terror. I saw her father holding a large knife standing at our bedroom door. I was consumed with fear and tried to scream, but nothing came out. As soon as he noticed I was awake, he then ran and jumped on me, pinning me to the bed and started cursing at me, yelling things at me like I hypnotized his daughter, I took his baby girl away from him, and so on. Mind you, he's a huge military trained dude, and I'm just some skinny, not very tall guy. And before I could react to anything, he started to cut on my throat with the knife right around when she woke up. I then started fainting, with her then letting out a blood-curdling scream. Well, that's the last thing I remember until I woke up in the hospital. She was right beside me. My neck suffered a small but quite deep cut from him putting the knife in it. I learned that as soon as she realized what was happening, she yanked the knife out of her father's hand, saving my life and immediately dialing 911. Apparently, after her father did that, he just went to the corner of the room and sat there with his head down until the police arrived with an ambulance. Even though I was shocked to my core, I still feel sorry for him. He was in major need of mental assistance. Nobody understood it back then, and perhaps her moving out made it even worse. At the end of the day, I'm alive and well with just a bruise on my neck as a forever reminder of the incident. Her father has since been diagnosed with schizophrenia and getting proper treatment now, and he's doing better. And if you're wondering what happened to us after that, well, we just got married the previous year, and we're very happy. We still remember that horrible night, and we promise each other we'll keep each other safe at any cost. To preface this, I'm a female, 34 years old, and I live in a small town of about 12,000 people. It's pretty quiet for the most part, but like any other town, it has its bad apples. It's a rural country town, and a nearby area is known for having some unsavory characters, basically just crackheads and junkies. One night when I hadn't been living in that town for too long, I was sitting at home and remembered that I needed some cash to pay for my portion of the rent and utility bill money the next day. So I decided to make a quick trip to the bank that wasn't too far away. I was still a little unfamiliar with the town and where things were, but I had for sure seen a bank nearby. Once I arrived, I noticed it had been permanently closed. Well, damn. I remember seeing another bank on Main Street, so I set out to get some cash. I arrive at the Main Street location and pull around to the drive-thru ATM. I roll down my window and place my card into the ATM reader. It's about 11 p.m., and where I live can be pretty dead at night, so it was quiet until I hear a dog barking, but the bark sounded off. More like a person mimicking a dog, but the bark sounded more like a signal to someone. It seemed strategic sounding, too rehearsed and human to be a dog. It made me nervous. I quickly scan in front of me. Nothing. I look in my rearview mirror. In the shadows, I see a scraggly shirtless man with something in his hand walking over a slight hill from the property behind the bank. I couldn't make out any distinguishing features, but I know a crackhead when I see it. He was heading towards my car. I quickly rolled up my window and spun around in my seat. He must have ducked behind the building because he had disappeared in a split second. I surveyed the area around my car. Nobody. I felt uneasy, like every nerve in my body was telling me to get out of there. My card was still in the machine, so I couldn't just drive off. I nervously rolled my window back down and finished my transaction, all while still darting my eyes around searching for any signs of the barking weirdo. I then yanked my money and card right out of the machine and rolled the window up successfully. By this time, a car had just rolled up behind me in the ATM line. They had come up from behind the building where I figured the old boy from earlier had ducked when I noticed him. I made one more glance in my rearview mirror at them. It was dark, and their faces were masterfully obscured from my view. They knew to stop far enough back so that the light from the ATM lane wouldn't show their faces, but I had a gut feeling who was in the car. I quickly pulled around to the front of the building and stopped my car. Sounds like a stupid move, but there was a method to my madness. I stopped so that I could get a better look at their faces in the streetlights, just in case crap hit the fan, you know? Almost as soon as I whipped around to the front of the bank, the car behind me whipped around too. They were on my tail in a millisecond. I knew they were going to follow me. They stopped on a dime right beside my car. You guessed it. Dogman and 2 others were in the car. They all looked over at me, surprised. I looked at them in the face, and they stared at me for an uncomfortable amount of time, but in actuality it was probably just a few seconds. They then immediately sped off, not even stopping at the stop sign. Busted. Looking back, I'm pretty sure that Barky was a lookout, and the others in the car were just hidden from view. The bark was a signal that someone was at the ATM, so they would pull up behind the person, follow them, and either rob them at home or then ambush and carjack them at a light or something. I'm not a genius, but I'm thankful that I had the forethought to stop and make sure that I saw their faces. I feel like it really saved me from being robbed or worse that night. I guess they didn't want to be ID'd, which is fine by me because I didn't want to be their victim. The story starts with me failing to bring my big energetic dog to the dog park at a reasonable hour. It's late at night, approaching 11 p.m., but she's going stir crazy, and my girlfriend is very upset, so I decide to bring her over there despite how late it is. However, I still have work to do, so I foolishly decide to bring my laptop with me to a remote area practically guaranteed to be empty at night. As I'm plugging away at my computer, a man in a Lakers windbreaker comes walking down the street heading to the right. The entire time he's looking directly at me, even turning his head all the way around as he walks past. He finally gets about 50 yards down the road where the gate to the dog park is. Suddenly he stops. He looks around, clearly looking up and down the road to see if there were any bystanders coming, and weighing a decision. After a few moments, he opens the gate and starts walking right toward me. Seeing the geography of the park, you would realize immediately as I did that there was no conceivable way he could have been intending to come to the park before he saw me. There's absolutely no doubt that he's intending to mug me and steal my laptop. I'm not scared though. I'm angry and frankly offended that this guy thinks I'm an easy target. So I calmly stand up and walk over to one of the shovels lying on the ground that people use to clean up after their dogs. I dispassionately pick it up and walk back to where my stuff is. I square my shoulders, puff out my chest, and confidently sling the shovel over my shoulder. He's about 20 feet away from me at this point. He's still approaching me, but just slightly more slowly, and his posture seems a bit more doubtful, if that makes sense. So I call out to him, something like, "Hey, how you doing, pal?" Which I hoped was a good choice that would sound relatively normal and not like a nerd trying to sound tough. I tried to put as much menace as I could on it without sounding too cartoonish. I must have done a good enough job, because at this he stops walking. I'm expecting him to say something back, and I'm watching his hands, which are still in his pockets. And then without a word, he turns around and walks away. I know this might seem like I think I'm a badass or something, but that was the very first time anyone tried to mug me. I was all adrenaline and anger in the moment, but looking back on it, I'm really lucky how it played out. I'm not sure I could have actually beaten him in a fight, but I had a pretty dangerous looking shovel and was genuinely willing to use it, and I knew that he probably wasn't going to risk a trip to the hospital or worse just for a generic laptop. But I'm also really glad that he didn't pull a gun or a knife on me. Still, I'm really proud of my response. Around the summer of 2017, I was in my sophomore year of high school. I was with my 2 friends, Johnny and Devin, on a Friday night. I was Snapchatting my crush at the time, and she was telling me that she was having a sleepover at a mutual friend's house. My crush's friend was also hitting on Johnny, and they were telling us to come over for a little bit to hang out since there were no parents at home. Of course, being the hormonal teens we were, My friends and I were set on making it to the house before it got too late. We convinced Johnny's mom to give us a ride over to the house, but she told us that she wasn't going to be able to pick us up since she had to go to bed early for work in the morning. This didn't matter to us at all since we were just focused on being able to hang out with girls at night. After we spent time with the girls, the main girl who lived at the house told us that we had to leave since it was getting late and she wanted to sleep. At this point, it was around 11 p.m. and we were broke high schoolers, so the idea of getting an Uber was out the window. The three of us just accepted the fact that we were going to have to walk back to Johnny's house. The distance was less than 4 miles, but it was going to take an hour to walk. There was nothing really eventful that happened during most of the walk. We ended up stopping at a 7-Eleven because Devin wanted to get some beef jerky. Johnny and I waited outside the store, and we saw 2 sketchy-looking dudes outside staring at Devin while he was in the store. As Devin came out, beef jerky in hand, he turned and looked at the 2 guys, then looked towards us, smiling with his beef jerky raised up. Johnny suggested that we cross the street because the people were starting to walk towards us. We continued to walk across the street and looked every few seconds to see the same 2 guys walking the same speed at us on the other side of the road. I think they knew we were looking at them a lot because one of them began to make a slow 2-tone whistling noise. About 3/4 of a mile from Johnny's house, we were whispering and trying to figure out a plan to make sure that these people didn't follow us back to his house. We looked across the road and the people were gone. This relief was short-lived as they appeared in an alleyway across the road with that same 2-tone whistle. Then Johnny said a phrase that put me into a fight or flight position. They're walking across the street towards us. At this point, Devin and I also turned to see that the 2 guys were walking towards us. When they saw the 3 of us turn to look at them, they then began sprinting at us. I'm honestly glad that the 3 of us had the same idea. Run. We all started running as fast as we possibly could, and I didn't want to stop until we got back to Johnny's house. I saw Devin drop his charger for his phone, and he stopped to grab it quickly and then caught back up with us. I didn't even dare to look back at the 2 guys chasing us, but I heard them yelling at us and doing that same horrifying 2-tone whistle. I was wearing these really beat up low-top Vans that were destroying my feet with every cushionless step that I took. It didn't matter. All that mattered was running until I couldn't hear those people yelling and whistling. I'm not really sure if the 2 guys were just trying to scare us and have a quick little laugh, but after 2 or 3 minutes, they finally stopped chasing us, but we still didn't stop running. I remember Devin saying, "They stopped chasing us," in between his gasps for air, and all I said back was, "Just keep running." We turned the corner and Johnny's house was less than 200 feet from us. Johnny ran faster so he could get to the door first and unlock it. We threw ourselves inside, locked the door, and then ran up the stairs to Johnny's room. We all spent the next few minutes catching our breath and checking out the window to see if we could spot the 2 sketchy guys walking around. I'm very glad to say that we didn't see them again, but Devin showed me a picture of a pistol that he searched up on his phone and then said, "This is what it looked like." When I went to grab my charger, I saw one of them with a gun that looked just like this. I'm not sure what is more bone-chilling, the fact that I was running away from 2 people with one of them having a gun, or the thought of turning around while running just to see a man with a gun running after me. I live in a relatively safe city in Scotland, though I have had several really scary and odd encounters since I moved here 4 years ago. I've been immersed in this subreddit for years before ever even creating an account, and to be honest, I learned a hell of a lot from all of the posts that I've read over the years. So I have Let's Not Meet to thank for my quick thinking. I'm a short 29-year-old woman, and I work in a pub, so I often get out of work quite late. On weekends, I usually head home at around 2 a.m. I never wear headphones when headed home at night, so this particular night was no different than usual. Alarms said, doors locked and checked, and said goodbye to my colleague and then went our separate ways to get home. I usually cross a grocery car park to get home. It's well lit, and that night something struck me as odd. There were a couple of cars parked there, which is normal, but something just felt off. I looked over my shoulder and clocked a guy in a hat walking a distance behind me. This wasn't weird, but I decided to keep an eye on him nonetheless. I exited the park to the main road that I lived off of, but still had a good mile or so to go before I reached my flat. I checked over my shoulder again, and sure enough, this guy was walking the same direction as me. The distance between us was starting to close, so I decided to cross the road. I usually did at this point anyway. Looking over my shoulder, I was able to not only look for traffic coming, but I was also able to keep an eye on him. I crossed the road and didn't bother to look back for a few minutes, assuming he had stayed on the other side, but I began to hear footsteps approaching. I glanced over my shoulder and saw this guy was about 20 feet behind me now. I had a soft drink in my glass bottle in my bag, and figuring I was overreacting but better safe than sorry, I stuck my hand in my bag and gripped the bottle. Another 45 seconds, and this guy was now close enough to touch me. But he slows to my pace and then says, "Hi, how are you?" I ignored him and I didn't respond. I long ago gave up on pretenses of being polite if I feel uncomfortable. A stranger's feelings matter less than my feeling of safety in any given situation, but he persists in talking to me. "Hi, are you going to work?" "No." I was being short with him. "Are you going home?" "Yes," I said coldly. "Do you live in this direction?" I just looked at him. He tried again. "Do you live off this road? Where do you live? Do you live close by?" I didn't respond and slowed my pace, letting him walk on. I was still gripping the glass bottle, ready to hit him with it should he try anything. He tried to slow down so I would catch up with him, but I slowed down so much that I was barely walking. He was maybe 300 yards away at this point, and simply stopped and turned around, watching me and waiting for me to catch up with him. I reached into my pocket with my free hand and tried my phone. Of course, my phone was dead. I figured it would last the walk home, but the dodgy battery had other ideas. Surprisingly though, I wasn't afraid. He had started walking again, but still quite slowly. He looked over his shoulder again after another minute, and I seized the opportunity. There was a path to a block of flats that was obscured by tall hedges, so I leaped behind them. I waited for nearly 10 minutes, never letting go of that bottle the whole time. I peeked around the hedges to make sure he was there. I peeked behind bins and bus stops to make sure he wasn't hiding in wait, but as far as I could tell, I had lost him. Maybe he didn't mean anything by this, but if you suspect a woman is afraid of you and she's walking alone at night, don't speak to her. It will not help, and especially don't ask her where she lives repeatedly. I wasn't drunk. I didn't appear to be drunk or need any help. I was just walking home as I ordinarily would. I am, however, inclined to believe that he had bad intentions. I would rather be too cautious than not, and this subreddit has definitely taught me how to do that. So for context, this happened a few years ago when I was 16. It was early August and me and my best friend, both female by the way, were at my house and decided to go on a walk around 11 p.m. I've always lived in a really nice neighborhood where no crime really happens. However, I'm still extremely aware of my surroundings. We walked to a school near my house and decided to indulge in the devil's lettuce. Now, this wasn't new to me, so although I definitely felt the effects, I wasn't out of it or anything at all. When we were done, we just kept walking. Eventually, we were walking on the sidewalk opposite a pharmacy which wasn't open at the time, so it was deserted, but I was kind of just staring over at it, and I saw some bikes around the corner of the building. As we kept walking, I kept my eye on it, and I noticed two big men who seemed homeless fiddling with the bikes. I could hear them angrily yelling, and it seemed the bikes were broken. It also seemed like they were on heavy drugs with how they were acting and yelling about the bikes. Then one of them looked up and started yelling at the other guy, who then looked up as well. We started walking faster as we were only about 30 feet away, and then the first man then yelled at his friend, "Hey, let's go get those bitches!" Let's rape the shit out of them. Hearing this sent me into fight or flight mode. I grabbed my friend and ran to a nearby car wash and then hid behind a car. I could hear them muttering and looking for us, but I guess they were too drugged out to logically look for us. While running away, I'd called the police who just now arrived, but by then the guys were gone. I never saw or heard about them again, but I'm so glad we ended up being fine. To anyone out there who likes to go on late night walks, always have your phone charged and always be aware of what's around you. This happened about a year ago when I was in my first year of university. For context, I'm from the UK and I lived in Students' Hall for my first year. It was in a flat with 2 boys and 4 girls, including me. There was a park nearby that we would often go to get some fresh air and sit at the swings and just talk about life and things in general. We were all very much night owls, so it wasn't uncommon for us to go late at night. One night, one of the other girls and I decided to go by ourselves as nobody else wanted to come. As you enter this park, there's a tall monument and some benches. We were walking along the path, and it was pretty much pitch black when a man stepped out of the darkness towards us. We jumped a little, but he was walking away from us, so we weren't too worried. However, we can be quite paranoid, so we kept looking behind us to check that he hadn't turned around and started following us. Turns out this time we were right to be paranoid. After this, we made our way down to the swings and sat on them, with our backs facing the path that we had just seen the man on. I guess this was probably mistake number 2. Number 1 being going on a walk by ourselves late at night. After about 10 minutes, we looked back, and by one of the big trees further up the path where we'd initially seen the man, there was a small light, which we guessed was a phone flashlight, and it was shining directly at us. The light from the phone allowed us to see a figure standing by the tree. As soon as we both turned to look, the light went out. At this point, we really should have run, but we didn't want to alert the man that we'd seen him. So our plan was to sit for another minute and then calmly walk off and out of the park. Luckily, we could exit the park without going back the way we came. As we sat in silence waiting for an appropriate time to get up, we saw the light again, but it was closer this time. We then decided to hell with our plan and just got up off the swings. It started as a fast walk, but in the end we were both running the hell out of that park, with my flatmate phoning her boyfriend who we lived with. By the time he answered, we were out of the park and now onto the main road. Whilst my friend caught her breath, I spoke to her boyfriend on the phone, and as I looked back towards the park retelling the story, I saw the light again. This time it was right up by the gate of the park, and instead of the whitish light that comes from the phones usually, there was an orange glow to it. The glow that comes from the phone when you have the flash on but you're covering it with your finger. At this point, I grabbed my friend and we started sprinting along the main road, not even explaining to her boyfriend on the phone what was happening. Her boyfriend came and met us on our way back to the flat, and we never saw that man again. Safe to say, we were very shaken up by this experience, and we never went to that park late at night again. Hey everyone, that's about it for today's stories. If you have your own story that you would like to send, you can send it in at southerncannibal.com, or you can email it at southerncannibalstories@gmail.com. I look forward to telling your story. Have a good night or good day, everyone, and remember to always